Hi, I'm Sammy Zambone, Ranger with the Department of Conservation and Recreation. Today I'm at Caledon State Park to discuss the skins and skulls that you might encounter during your Envirothon competition. When you're handed a skull, one of the first steps in identifying what species you have is determining whether or not you're looking at an herbivore, a carnivore, or an omnivore. Herbivores, such as this beaver, feed on plants and have a reduced dentition. When you look at the skull, you can see incisors in the front used for snipping plant material and molars at the back that are used for grinding. You can see this gap between their front teeth and their grinding back teeth. This gap is called a diastema and is frequently found in many herbivores, including white-tailed deer, rabbits, and rodents such as the beaver. Carnivores, such as this bobcat, which feed primarily on the flesh of other animals, also have a reduced dentition. Their teeth are specialized with incisors in the front and canines for tearing, and then sharper premolars and molars in the back used for grinding before swallowing. Omnivores, such as this possum, feed on both plants and animals and have the widest number of teeth of our different animal species. Their teeth are designed for incisors for cutting flesh, canines for gripping, and molars for grinding and tearing. These three pelts belong to our three canid species we have here in Virginia. Coyotes are the largest of the three species and can be found in open fields and hardwoods, and even can be found in developed residential areas. Coyotes migrated from the west and are larger here in the east than their western counterparts. Their fur tends to be thick and of tannish color. Some have this black stripe along the top and a relatively thick tail. The eastern population of red fox was introduced by European settlers seeking a game to hunt. Its fur is thick and red, and the fox is larger than our native gray fox. When looking at the tail, often the red fox tail has this white tail light, easy to identify. Much smaller than either the red fox or the coyote, our native gray fox can have a variation in its fur. It will contain some red, but will have gray in it. And when you look at the end of the tail, the tip is usually black or a reddish color, not the white of the red fox. Much smaller than the red fox, gray fox is the only species of canid we have in the area that can climb trees. Looking at the skulls of all three canid species, we can see they resemble the skulls of domestic dogs. All three have large eye sockets facing forward, giving them good binocular vision as predators, a long rostrum or snout, and a wide variety of teeth considering all three are omnivores. The skull of the coyote is much larger than the skulls of either of the fox species. If you are able to determine that you're looking at a canid and you've eliminated the coyote because the skulls are smaller than you would expect, looking at the cranial ridge is a good way to determine whether or not you're looking at a fox, a red fox, or a gray fox. The ridge on the top of each head has a different shape for each species. If you can remember that a red fox has a Latin name of Vulpes vulpes, then you can look at the ridge and you can see it makes a sharp V point, matching the V in Vulpes. The Latin name for gray fox is Urocyon cinerogensis, And if you can remember the U in Urocyon, you can remember that its ridge makes a U shape versus the V shape in Vulpes. And this is an easy way to tell the difference between having a red fox and a gray fox skull. Inhabiting similar habitats, the North American beaver and the northern river otter are vastly different animals. Looking at its pelt, the beaver has very thick fur, a double coat with longer guard hairs on the outside. Its body shape is generally round, and when looking for a tail, generally beaver pelts will not have a tail, as the tail cannot be taxidermied. The river otter, on the other hand, as a member of the weasel family, has a long, sleek body which ends with a long furred tail. What are some other ways that you could tell the difference between a beaver and an otter? Let's take a look at their skulls. Beavers are members of the rodent family. In fact, they are the largest rodents in North America. As rodents, they are herbivorous and have a reduced dentition. One of the easy ways to tell you're looking at a beaver skull will be the thick orange enamel on their front teeth. The enamel is orange because it contains iron. They have a reduced number of teeth and show a diastema separating their front incisors from their rear molars. A beaver skull, when you look at it, will appear extremely heavy and very thick. River otters, on the other hand, are members of the weasel family and are carnivores. Their eyes face forward to give them good definition and distance vision. They also have a very short rostrum or snout and a very long rear cranium, giving them kind of an elongated head. Their teeth, designed for catching prey and tearing through flesh, have a reduced dentition of all carnivores. Our next species is the bobcat. Its fur has a gray-brown coloring to it and is soft. The head, if visible, is short with small ears on the top. And the biggest tell that you're looking at a bobcat is the short tail that gives it its name. When looking at the skull of a bobcat, some of the key features to remember are its large forward-facing eyes, marking it as a predator, its short rostrum or snout, which gives its skull an overall impression of being round like a ball, and its reduced dentition, much fewer than any of the canine species, as bobcats are carnivores and not considered omnivores like canids. The next three pelts are what we might call what you might find in your trash can. This little happy critter right here is a raccoon. Some of the easy ways to tell is if you look at the face, you'll notice that there's a black mask around the eyes, long gray body with a dark stripe across the back, ends in a ringtail. Our next fur is a striped skunk. Black and white with two stripes down its back. Is pretty distinctive. There is another skunk you may see out on the western end of the state, which is the spotted skunk, which doesn't have the distinctive stripes but does have a series of white spots. And the last of this group of three is the Virginia possum. It's distinctive from the others in that it has a light gray body with a creamy face and sides and underbelly. Unlike the other two, a typical taxidermy skin will not have a tail. Let's take a look at their skulls. We'll look at the raccoon skull first. As an omnivore, raccoons have a diverse dentition. They have incisors and canines for ripping and tearing, and then molars for grinding. Sometimes you might confuse this skull with that of a canid, one of the fox species. But when you look at the rostrum, the skull on a raccoon has more of a dome shape than the canids do, any of the fox species or the coyote. Much smaller than the raccoon or the possum is the skull of the skunk. Carnivorous insectivores, they feed on insects, and so they have a reduced dentition when compared to the other two species. They also have a cranial ridge that sticks up, but not nearly as much as the one you see on the Virginia possum. Now let's take a look at the Virginia possum. Probably one of our most distinct skulls. The possum has small eyes, so the eye sockets are very small. As an omnivore, it has a wide variety of teeth. In fact, possums have 52 teeth, the most of any North American mammal species. And one of its most distinct features is this ridge that runs down the top of its head, giving the possum a look of having a mohawk. Moving on to one of our larger species of mammals here in Virginia, this is a pelt for a black bear. Black bear pelts can come in a variety of shades, including a dark brown, a black, and almost a cinnamon color. One of the distinct features is the head shape of the bear. If you have a full pelt that's been taxidermied, you may also see the claws and the overall size and shape of a bear that makes it distinctive. A bear's skull is also distinctive when compared to the other ones we've looked at today. This skull came from a young cub, and you can see it has a short back to the head, a relatively long rostrum or snout, and if the teeth were intact, you'd see a wide variety of teeth, as bears are omnivores. What other characteristics might help you tell this skull apart from other animals? While I don't have a pelt for the white-tailed deer, I do have some skulls that we can take a look at. This is one of our most common mammal species in Virginia, often seen along our roadsides, sometimes even in our yards eating our shrubs. This skull here is from a doe, a female deer. Large eyes out to the side give it the ability to look for predators. As an herbivore, it has a reduced dentition. The incisors in the front of the skull are missing, but you could see the diastema, which would separate its incisors from its rear grinding molars. Distinctive from our other species, based on the size of the skull and its dentition, but also separating it out is the fact that males have antlers. Antlers are different than horns. Antlers are made up of bones, while horn is made up of keratin and hair growing in a sheath. When you look at this deer, you can see the antlers growing off the top of the head. White-tailed deer grow and shed their antlers, which are only found on males, each year. And if this deer had shed its antlers before it had died, you would have still seen the attachment points on the skull. Sheds can get quite large. This one you can see here. You can see the plate where it attached to the skull. And this one sat out in the woods for a while. Rodents and other animals will chew on shed antlers to retrieve the calcium. And here you can see the lower jaw of a white-tailed deer. Again, this is missing part of the front where the front incisors would be. But deer jaws are important for wildlife biologists, as they can use charts found on the Department of Wildlife Resources website to look at the teeth and identify how old a particular deer was. Let's take a look at a few other skulls to identify a few different species found in Virginia. This skull here comes from a bald eagle. Adult bald eagles have a distinctive yellow coating to their beak. Before they reach maturity at between 4 and 5 years of age, their beak would be brown. But you can tell it's a bald eagle based on the size of the skull, the shape of the beak, and the scleral ridges that help hold its eye and protect its eye in its skull. Looking at this next skull, this is the skull of a great horned owl. You can see its dark colored beak, and one of the most distinct features of this skull is this scleral ridge, which goes around the eyes. Unlike human eyes, which are round, eyes for owls are more of a tube shape, and this bone ridge helps keep their eye in place and protect it. Looking at it compared to the bald eagle, you can see this one is much more held in place, where this one is a little more loose in the skull. Their beak is also shorter and shaped slightly different. This is an actual skull versus the other two being models, and this one comes from a great blue heron. This skull has a long, straight beak used for catching fish, frogs, and snakes out of wetlands, and also has large eyes but lacks the scleral ridge that the other two have. Now this last one, you might wonder, what kind of bird did this come from? It looks similar to a heron, but this one is actually not a bird at all. You can tell, looking at the teeth in the skull, that this is actually the skull of a fish known as a long-nosed gar. While it's bony, it's actually more cartilage, and you can see the scales that would make up the back of this bony fish. And you can find this in rivers all over Virginia. So that was some basics on identifying skins and skulls of animals common to Virginia. Hopefully I will see you all on January 30th, and I can answer questions for you then. Thanks.